an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Mage Errant series, Book 1, Into the Labyrinth, chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20. The Contract, Something Hungry This Way Comes, An Unexpected Conversation, and The Heart of the Library. In this episode, I guess now, after what I said last week, we're going to have to talk about the fact that the bad guy was behind a lot of things that were happening. I didn't expect this. I'll be honest. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat. What's up, Dan? And McShard is here, and Sush is here, or Sush. Is it Sush like sushi, or Sush like sustenance? I slay me. These chapters are full of really big revelations, and So I said last time how much of a sort of mixed reaction I tend to have, like in regard to, oh, there was a plan the whole time. And I feel like this twist kind of falls in the, I think it works, but I think it could have been done better category. Because what we wind up finding out here is that, first of all, even though our friend Hugh begins to say Bakori at the end of the previous chapter, he doesn't finish saying it. So I went into this fully expecting that we were going to start off with our conversation with Bakori in chapter 17, and instead he gets distracted by something else in his little spell book here. And these are from the index node. And he had asked when they first were at the library, like, will I always be able to reach it? And they said basically, like, if there's, you know, a node close enough nearby, I think. So anyway, this winds up opening a different door for him. But the issue is that he isn't operating with correct information here. Because as we find out later, Alustin gave him, he gave him a little white lie, a little fib. And I am kind of curious why, because he says that he lied, but I don't remember the reasoning behind it. He had told Hugh that the index is like almost sentient. It has the capacity to become sentient, which is why Hugh believes he can make a warlock pact with it. And it turns out that is not true. It is basically controlled by a mind that is connected to it. And so when Hugh tries to make a pact with the index itself, he inadvertently makes a pact with a being that is sort of managing the index at the time. And again, please, guys, remind me if I have forgotten, but I did read this section twice, and I don't remember Alustin explaining why he misled him on that. But regardless, so at this point, Hugh attempts to locate 72 uses of dragon dung. I think he's just trying to see if this will show him a way out initially. And it doesn't go anywhere. It turns around and lands in front of him and just like unfolds itself. And then he starts to think about forming this pact and asks it to, like, makes the request of it. And it's an interesting thing because as he is asking, the tone of the index changes. So overall, it's got this very impersonal sort of energy. And then as the conversation continues, it starts to seem to have a little bit more of an emotional response to the things that he's saying, which supports his, like, the information he has that it's near sentient. It makes it seem like, oh, this is what he meant, but it's actually because there is a person talking to him. And basically, it goes back and forth asking him a lot of questions about his situation, and he gives info about, like, who they are, what their attunements are, and the circumstances that got them, like, caught in the 5th layer of the labyrinth. I appreciate that when he says they're in the 5th layer, he's like, if Bakori was telling the truth. And I was like, yo, thank you, Hugh, because it didn't even occur to me that Bakori might have been lying, and it should have. You know, I took it for granted he was just telling him the truth because it made it like, why wouldn't you? Because I'm still not at this point aware of the extent to which Bakori's been manipulating him. So then this being comes back and asks, why do you seek to pact with me to save my friends? There was no response for a moment. Very well. I'm willing to pact with you, but not without firmly establishing terms and conditions. And then we get a really lovely sort of preview of all of the various, like, contingencies and clauses of all of this. And I really liked this because, look, let's be real here. Hugh probably should have created some more contingencies on his end in the first place. And he is just very lucky that the person he was dealing with is on the up and up. Because it seems like Hugh is so desperate that he is just willing to accept any help, and he doesn't stop to consider the potential danger to himself and you know what I mean? Like, so it's just interesting to see how immediately he was willing to sign his name to fucking anything. But this person has to be like, slow your roll, buddy. I have my lawyer here, and we are going to draft some provisions. And finally, he accepts, and he starts to pull out. Let's see. Oh, right, here it is. He pulled out the second sheet of index paper and began to copy the contract he'd recorded in his spellbook onto it. He drew a series of spell forms linking the clauses on the first page with the contract, then linked it all together. The last step was actually signing it. It didn't require actually signing the contract or signing it in blood like some imaginative storytellers had claimed. Instead, it simply required both parties to channel their mana into the 2 unlinked portions of the contract spell forms. Normally, both parties needed to be physically present, but since they were writing the contract on paper that was physically part of the index, Hugh was sure it would work fine. So he reaches his finger forward, and all of a sudden the word no is like scrawled across the page. It pulls out of his hand and bursts into flames. And he's like, what the fuck? And it turns out this is specifically a form for contracting with demons. And we don't find out whether or not this, like, it's pretty clear to me that Bakori helped him to locate this particular, like, that Bakori was behind so much. But what I am curious about is the fact that the book he found it in is not supposed to be part of the index. The index can't find it. There's no record of it. So Bakori being able to affect what is in the library and not is very concerning to me. That feels like something that should have more intense security. And the fact that he can just slip a book with that kind of power that's so specific in where he wants, I find that very alarming. So anyway, in the end, the index is telling him, I really think this is the only way to find you. Ordinarily, I would never do this. And I also am doing it now against better judgment. But the only thing that you guys can do is stay put. I'm going to do what I need to find you, but you can't be moving around because I'm sending people to come get you. So he signs it with his, pressing his finger, and then he, all of a sudden basically passes out. And we have a pretty intense sequence here where he is just in this void. There are spell forms that are like on the page, but then they like touch him and they begin to burn. And the pain is just horrific. And let's see, even as he watched the blisters and welts faded into nothing, he could feel writing on his back as well, and somehow knew it was the contract's clauses. Slowly, the tattooed contract began to fade. So did the white void around him, but it wasn't replaced by the cave. Instead, Hugh found himself being swept up by a mighty river. And all of a sudden, he is waking up, and here is fucking Talia, and she is just beating the hell out of him, because that is what she does, because Talia doesn't know how to use her words. She's going to have to learn. I don't know. Talia, sir, I'm going to call her sir, because honestly, she's being irrational, and that's a man thing. I need you to figure out how to keep it inside a little bit more. Either she has to learn to do that, or because Alustin hasn't been putting them through their paces with combat training, this is going to serve as the sort of crucible that Hugh gets put through to learn to, take physical pain. So anyway, they are all like, what the fuck happened? Because apparently he has been out for hours, which is really, truly so much longer than I was expecting. It's everything that has happened to him that he has either not known about or been unconscious for, it has made me feel very unmoored, is kind of where I'm at. I do enjoy that eventually Sabé pulls Talia off him, and then she gives him a hug, and then Godric's like, where's my hug? And I was like, nice, thank you. When they ask him what affinities he got, he says he doesn't know and didn't think to ask, and everybody is like, are you high? Why wouldn't you ask? And again, not really doing the best thinking in this scenario. So they exchange info about what happened, and then he does his thing where he says, I'm really sorry I have been a burden. And all of them are like, what are you fucking talking about? And they each give him an example of things that he has done to help. When I was talking about the value that he added to the group last episode, I focused a lot on the value that he added magically speaking. But the examples that a lot of them give are him just physically pulling them out of situations that they were too weak to get themselves out of. And I have to be real, I didn't even think of those. I know that that's a weird place to be, where I'm just I'm genuinely only looking at it as what is he able to contribute in terms of magical abilities that they don't already have covered. But the thing that he has is sheer endurance, really. He has been the one to get through things because he isn't using up his mana. So he is still upright and walking when they are completely drained. And yeah, he manages to pull Talia away from the statues. He manages to pull Godric away from the bones that explode. And the whole sequence with them talking to him about what he has done for them, I really felt man, I truly appreciate that I didn't think of any of those things either. I was not fully in the headspace Hugh was. He was being really hard on himself, but I was still overlooking a lot of pretty important stuff, So Yeah. Dan says, and a kid, it's pretty realistic. He doesn't act like a trained contract lawyer. I liked that. I definitely appreciate that he's not completely on top of things. But as a kid who thought constantly about what I would do were I ever to encounter a genie, I feel like someone like him would have thought a great deal about what he would say when he was coming up with like the contract for a being, because this is something that he knows is actually going to be a decision he has to make. Whereas my genie scenario was pure wishful thinking. And I won't lie to you guys, I still sometimes just sit and think, let's see, a genie today in the year of 2023, how would that go? And so, yeah, I feel like he is somebody who has a lot of attention to detail based on his work with wards, and I think he would have thought of more of this. But again, he is also like in this complete panic, and he's being mentally manipulated. So there's that. So I'm going to take a step back here and talk about the writing. And this is sort of a consistent thing that has popped up throughout the book. I feel like there needed to be an editor to come in and catch some double usage of words really close together. Even sometimes phrasing, because there are almost identical words used like one sentence after the other in a way that feels really redundant and distracting. And it's the kind of thing that I know I would write it this way were I doing my first draft, because you tend to use similar words over and over. We have phrases that sort of lodge themselves in our heads from things that we read. We have phrases we came up with that we like, and we maybe tend to overuse a little bit. You know, even writers that have great editors, there's a running joke with Dresden Files about how often he uses certain phrasing, and it's just everybody sort of like good-naturedly makes fun of it because he does that very, very consistently. However, this doesn't really fall into that category because it's not specific to this writer. It's just words that are like... So I'm going to go to the others later, but this one, I mentioned in the very first like sentences how many times he uses the word good, and I don't feel like it's on purpose. There is a certain emphasis that can be used, like sustained if you're using a word over and over to sort of hammer it in and get into a rhythm with it. But that didn't feel like what he was trying to do. And that was like the first sentence, which really should undergo a lot more scrutiny. And then here, they hear growling. Everyone went immediately silent. Hugh cursed himself silently. That kind of thing. And that pops up a whole lot. Just, you know, they're short sentences too. So the fact that the same word or similar is used so close together is even more obvious, because if you have a sentence that's, you know, got two separate sections, or like there's a semicolon between or anything, there's enough breakup that you wouldn't notice necessarily, or it wouldn't bother you. But here, everyone went immediately silent. Hugh cursed himself silently. Those are 4 and 5 sentences. No, 4 words per sentence for both sentences. You need to mix it up a little bit. And I'm not trying to be like too hard on this guy at all, you know, but it's the sort of thing that I'm not a person who really feels like I know the difference between good and bad writing, particularly. A lot of people will say something was poorly written that I thought was fine. Or people will say something was like really well written that I didn't really notice anything particularly good about it. It was just, you know, so I don't like to flatter myself that I'm a great critic in that sense. All I know is what works in my head, rhythmically speaking, when I'm reading, and especially listening to the audiobook as well. When you hear it read out loud, there is a certain like sort of jarring quality sometimes. So this stood out for me, and there's a couple more later that I'll mention, but I'll get there. So anyway, here comes this like 10-foot tall wolf with all these mouths and fangs, and Hugh is opening his mind and reaching for help. And he just blasts this thing apart with a shaft of molten light. And he passes out. And we find out later that he not only drained all of his own mana, which is insane, he also pulled ambient mana out of the atmosphere around him, which is something that he had asked whether that was possible to do and just use it directly instead of putting it into reserves. And Alestin had basically been like, I mean, you can, but there's no benefit to that. And now I'm like, well, I guess there's a benefit to doing it in that you can use more than you've even got capacity for. But it doesn't seem like that's something that you should do often, or at least he's not trained enough, because that knocked him right the fuck out. So he wakes up and Alestin is here and he is reading this book, and he doesn't even like look at Hugh the entire time that they are talking. And what I found really interesting here was the sort of obvious parallels between Harry waking up in the infirmary and Albus Dumbledore being there, but how quickly we know in the Harry Potter series that Dumbledore's lying all the fucking time, or just keeping things from Harry, if not outright lying. And we don't find out how severe those lies are until a lot further down the line. And here we're finding out about lies that Alestin has told pretty quick. And Hugh is being handed over from Alestin's care, essentially, to a new mentor, which is also an interesting thing that we're finding out Alestin had not intended, it seems, to take any apprentices, and is a bit ambitious and maybe a little bit of a show-off even. And I kind of am fascinated by the fact that Alestin hasn't wound up being the like sage elder mentor character that I'm used to seeing. And I like that. So he asked what happened after I passed out, thing with the mana. And he says, we brought you out of the labyrinth and you've been recovering ever since. You were unconscious for about 2 days, even with all the healing magic the infirmary healers have been pumping into you, which is just such a long time. It's astonishing that you survived as long as you did down there, Hugh. No one has ever heard of a group of first years that made it down that deep and lived to tell the tale. Most full mages seldom venture much deeper than you went. You were extremely lucky, but you also had help. And he tells Hugh, your contracted partner is here in the library, so you're with me, you'll be fine, but we have to go meet them in person. And then, I've been lying to you for some time, Hugh. When's the last time you've gone outside the mountain? When have you gone outside? And Hugh can't remember. And when Alestin presses him and is like, no, tell me like specifically, Hugh realizes he actually doesn't remember at all. And Alestin says, yeah, everybody in this building maintains that you have literally never stepped foot out of this building since you entered it on day one. There have been lots of like field trips. Your friends have asked to go out and you have declined all of them, skipped classes to avoid these things. And Hugh is really taken aback by this and hadn't noticed. And then Alestin pulls these rolled up drawings out, and Hugh recognized them as the wards from his room currently and his old room. And when Alestin asks him, do you know what these spell forms do? Hugh doesn't know. And he's like, why would I draw them when I don't know what they are? So Alestin drops this bomb. You've been in contact with a demon since the first day you walked into Skyhold, but it wasn't conscious. Uncontracted warlocks are particularly susceptible to mental manipulation by potential contracting partners. Demons are especially fond of doing so, and by doing so, gaining the services of warlocks. Since you first set foot in Skyhold, the demon you met below has been subtly manipulating you in an effort to gain a contracted warlock. The demon Bakori was the reason you never left the mountain. If you had, you would have left the range of his mental manipulation, and who knows if you would have willingly returned. He was the reason you kept isolating yourself socially farther and farther. And Hugh is like, I've always been like awkward with that. He didn't, before I even came here. And Alessan's like, yeah, but he made it worse. And he made you feel more lonely, and he amplified your feelings of despair and your, feelings of worthlessness surrounding magic. And it all made you more vulnerable. It was Bakori that led you to the library door with the weakened wards, and Bakori that led you to the volume of forbidden spells in here, not the index. And then, remember the gut feelings to go down specific pathways? That came from Bakori. It was Bakori who led you to that secret chamber above the Mana Flume chamber where you found him. Rhodes was manipulated there as well, but by swarms of Bakori's imps instead. In retrospect, the test should have been stopped as soon as students started reporting imps showing up. It's amazing we didn't have any deaths this year. It was Bakori who amplified your despair as you fought your way through the labyrinth, and it seems Bakori almost had you in that last cavern. But you fought back. You've been fighting back this whole time. You might not have been consciously aware you were being manipulated, but you knew subconsciously, and you were fighting to the point that you were unknowingly drawing wards on your door to try and keep Bakori out of your dreams. In fact, your unusual abilities with wards might be directly related to this. I've never heard of a warlock whose will-imbuing abilities apply to ward crafting. The vast majority of warlocks have those talents apply elsewhere, battle magic, bindings, or banishments usually. Your subconscious might have forced your will-imbuing abilities to apply to your wards in order to help protect you from the demon. And he admits that he's been piecing some of this together from info, but also that he has been spying, and that one of his attunements is far-seeing. So, let's talk about this. I am not mad at this. In fact, I enjoy the metaphor of this literal demon as a mental health issue. It feels like obviously Bakori is meant to sort of represent the worst of us, the parts of our brains that are trying to screw us. Because anybody who has struggled with like mental health, feelings of worthlessness, depression, anxiety, those feelings are a oddly separate entity in your head sometimes that feels like it's talking to you and not part of you, depending on, and you can mistake it for being you. And then when you kind of come out of, especially like a depressive episode, looking back, you're like, oh, wow, I really was like fucking taking things the wrong way, or hearing a thing in a different way than was clearly intended by a person. And you just start to see how much your fucked up mental state at the time was influencing the perception you had of everything around you. So in that respect, I really like it in terms of, especially with the fact that Hugh has been so mistreated by his aunt and uncle, and, the whole situation being even worse than what we heard about. And he was already sort of susceptible because he didn't see the worth in himself. The fact that Bakori was preying on him and making all of those things worse, I like that he isn't entirely responsible for the way he felt about himself, but he was leaning on it and making it worse. It just feels like a cool metaphor that I think might resonate with a lot of kids, especially because you don't have a lot of language for that sort of feeling when you're young. And especially how hard he was being on himself when he was in the labyrinth at the end there, and that he even thought of some things that he had done to help, but his mind pushed those thoughts away. All of this is, I think, a really interesting concept. That said, I really wish that we had gotten a bit more of him being afraid to leave the building. Because as somebody who deals with anxiety and depression, I experience agoraphobia a lot. And a lot of people think that agoraphobia is a fear of open spaces, and it's actually more a fear of being somewhere that help can't reach you. And the sense of putting myself out into the world without a full plan of where I'm going and how to get there, what I'm going to do when I get there, I get really flipped out sometimes, even in a place that's mostly familiar. If I'm going to a specific place that isn't familiar, I will just avoid leaving the house because I am feeling vulnerable and sensitive and incompetent. And so I wish that we had gotten a bit, he doesn't go outside, but we never hear him get, I don't remember a specific mention of him avoiding a field trip. Probably it was, but it wasn't made much of. And then his friends asking him if he wants to go to the docks, and he instead is like, I found a secret door to the library. That doesn't get my attention at all, because that is better. Everybody agrees when they go into that secret library that this is way cooler than the docks. So that just feels like, no, I'm making a different decision because it's more fun. But I would have liked to see them trying to coax him outside and him experiencing these strange feelings of anxiety surrounding that he can't explain, because I fucking have that. And it's such a weird thing, you guys. And I know a lot of folks experience this too. Neurodivergent folks, hear me on this. There are times where I, on my own behalf, can't do a thing. But if my friend needs me because they're freaking out, now, yes, I can do the thing and do it with no problem and do it well. If it's for me, I will procrastinate and or find a different way so that I don't have to. But if I'm caring for another person or assisting another person, all of a sudden, now I've got it and it's no problem. And because Hugh is such a selfless person, it would have been kind of interesting to see Bakori fighting with Hugh and his instinct to stay inside when he's by himself, but then his friends are around. And now he's like a little bit more interested and a little bit more willing in how that would manifest. And just overall, I feel like there's room in this book for that. This book isn't long. It moves really quickly. I think this concept of Bakori manipulating him could have been fleshed out a lot more, and I don't think it would have felt too much. It wouldn't have been padding, So anyway, at this point, they pass into this mist, and he is trying to talk to this index. He thinks that, the index still is sentient, and then we get a lesson. There's another lie I told you. The index isn't alive. You didn't form a contract with the index. You formed a contract with the mind controlling the index. You packed it. Oh, excuse me. God, you guys, I just burped in your ears. I'm so sorry. You packed it with High Librarian Kandaran Crux. And they pull out of the mist. And here is this giant sphinx-like creature on a blue crystal dais. And she has blue crystal wings. And she is 75 feet long, not counting her tail, which is just so enormous. And I will tell you guys, I know she's described in detail as a sphinx, having the body of a lion, her tail, everything. Ask me why every time I let my mind wander, she became an owl. I don't know, truly, but she just kept mentally turning into an owl, and then I had to adjust and put her back into a lion. And it just happened just fucking repeatedly, and I don't know what was going on there. Part of me is thinking, like, I saw a Magic the Gathering card with a giant owl in a library reading a book who was like a professor or something, and it just embedded in my brain, and I've just like transplanted that. But it just kept happening, and I kept having to mentally reestablish what she is. It was so... ugh. So, maybe that's it. Braincase says Avatar Hidden Library. I forgot about that. Maybe that is it, actually. Because I only have the vague memory of that episode, but because this image is in my head so hard, a lot of times that can be a sort of subconscious thing. So, yeah, I could see that. That could be it. Yep. Thank you, Braincase. Real Braincase over there. So he's looking at her wings too, and the fact that they're like crystal, he can't tell, did they grow like this? Are they crafted? Like, what is the deal? And they tinkle and stuff when they touch each other. So she greets him, and her voice is so loud that it almost like knocks him down, even though he's kneeling already. And she immediately apologizes and is like adjusts. And she asks, do you know why I accepted your offer to pact with me? And he thinks it's just to keep him from making a pact with Bakori. And she's like, well, that was nice, because I low-key thought I had killed that fucking dickhead a real long time ago. And now I'm out here finding out that bitch is still alive and breathing, and I'm not super thrilled. So while he's still alive and that sucks, getting to fuck him over is a treat. However, no, that's not the thing. And he says, I'm nobody special. And she's like, dude, you were being mentally manipulated by a demon that you were fighting alone for a year. And you got the attention of one of my prized pupils who had never wanted to take on a student to begin with. So, yeah, I'm going to say you're somebody, and you can just stop it. And she goes through each of his friends and all of the like obstacles that they have overcome with their magic, and the fact that they are each in their way doing things that are really unusual. And by each, I mean Talia and Sabé. Godric isn't mentioned here because Godric has a pretty straightforward magic style. So he hasn't had anything specifically that he's been trying to overcome that's been working against him this whole time. Talia and Sabé are the ones that really, this deck was stacked against them. And then this thing fucking killed me. I swear to God. There are, let's see. You were so desperate to prove your worth to yourself that you took on a task generally considered to be the domain of archmages. There are plenty of mages who create their own spell forms. Learning to do it on the fly? There are only a handful of mages on the continent with the knack for it. Alliston isn't even capable of it. And had I known what he was up to, I would have forbidden him from trying to teach it to you for fear of catastrophic failure. Word? And Alliston is just like, he was a natural. How was I supposed to resist teaching? Like, come on. I had to. And she's just like, you know, that was just sheer ambition, bitch. And she's clearly like, but I liked it. But yeah, the fact that he was out here just like, I'm going to teach him to do this really dangerous thing that grown-ass men can barely do, that I can't even do. Alliston, I'm really judging you, buddy. So then he's like, so, okay, is that why? And she says, no, you wanted to pact with me no matter who I was because you didn't realize what you were getting just because you wanted to save your friends. It was total selflessness and you were willing to take this huge risk and it was for them. And I like that a lot. It's the sort of thing that it makes me think of just, if you're somebody with like a lot of money or a really well-known like person in the media, a celebrity, royalty, thinking about like Harry and Meghan, and you're like blind dating and people don't know who you are and they're reacting a certain way to you without the awareness of all of the like material benefits that you could bring to a relationship, it's going to really be different, than somebody who is aware of the trappings of wealth. And it's a sort of similar situation here. He didn't know what a powerful person he was dealing with. He didn't know the crazy benefits that he might get out of this. He was just doing whatever he could to not pact with Bakori and to save his friends. So he asks finally, what are my affinities? Because that thing that happened that knocked me out was pretty scary. That is the most offensively oriented of the affinities I've granted you. It is commonly known as a star affinity, though I prefer stellar affinity as a name. It is closely related to, though distinct from, solar affinities. Once fully attuned, you'll possess immense destructive capability, but don't rely on it, because they take a lot of mana, and you won't be able to use more than one in like a day for a long time. I'm really powerful, and I have to be very careful how frequently I use those. And the next one, she's like, the next one's obvious, and he fucking doesn't get it. And she's like, crystal affinity, hello. Is that to rock affinities like steel affinities are to iron affinities? There is a small amount of validity to that comparison, but it is more incorrect than otherwise. We'll discuss that another time, but suffice to say, this will be the one you use out of the three that you have, you use it the most. It provides numerous defensive, a few offensive, and a lot of versatility, and might be able to help you with some of your wards. The third affinity is complicated. It is sometimes erroneously called a labyrinth affinity. It's known as a dimensional affinity, but I tend to prefer referring to it as a planar affinity. The most basic use of it is creating extra dimensional spaces. And then she gets right up in his face. It is not a natural affinity, and absolutely no one is born with it. It can normally only be trained. Even with your exceptional skills, you are never, under any circumstances, to even tap into that affinity without my express command. 9 out of 10 mages who attempt to develop a planar attunement die in the attempt, and I do not intend to waste my effort and have you be one of them. And he asks, why is it so dangerous? And she says, look over the edge of my dais. And he looks. And she says, how far do you think that goes down? And he says, I don't know. And she says, neither do I. I intended this room to be a mid-sized addition to the library. But thanks to unanticipated interactions with the magic of the labyrinth, this room has continued to grow every year of its existence. It grows not only when we add new books, but grows on its own, adding books seemingly on its own. There's another example of the repeated thing. It grows on its own, adding books seemingly on its own. We don't need to use that phrasing twice in a row, right one after the other. Planar magic is terrifyingly difficult and seldom works as intended. And I was like, that does sound very, very intimidating. What I keep thinking of with this is like tesseracts in A Wrinkle in Time. And like occasionally they would wind up on planets where the humans couldn't survive, like 2-dimensional planets and stuff. And they'd have to like bounce right the fuck up out of there or just die. Or, you know, as she said, 9 out of 10, just die. And she's like, eventually, you may have other magical abilities that come forward, but, you know, over time, we're just going to have to wait and see and be patient about it. So then she has Alestin pull the stone out that Hugh had found on the skeleton in the labyrinth. And it turns out that it was like down there soaking up labyrinth mana to begin with, which is already like going to make this thing very powerful and rare. But then he was wearing it when they actually did their pact. But it bonded to him. And Alestin said, I mentioned that you might be able to form multiple warlock pacts due to your unusually large mana reservoirs. I didn't expect you to do so until far in the future, and frankly, I have no idea what a pact with a labyrinth stone will do, or whether it riding along another pact will allow it to become intelligent like other pacted items. And Kandaron is like, yeah, me neither. And I'll tell you what, I'm not used to not knowing shit, and it's not great. I don't love it. So this is very, very interesting. Let's see. Amek Shard says, I love Hugh consistently being appreciated. And then imagine someone offering a heroic sacrifice to your filing system, not knowing who you are. That's true. Amek Shard says, mucking around with space and dimensions is very dangerous when you don't know exactly what you're doing. Oh, yeah. Look, you guys, I'm going to be honest. I just talked about how I get like agoraphobia sometimes just doing normal shit. I have such intense anxiety driving through Dallas because of every like exit is one right on top of the other, and it's so easy to take the wrong one, and there's not another exit after this patch of them for like 6 miles. So if you don't take the right one, you're completely out of the way of where you wanted to go, and it's going to add another like 10-15 minutes. That is the extent to which I can handle issues with space and dimension. Multiple exits on the Dallas highway. Too much for me. I am out. I am very uninterested in pursuing some shit that could just like shred me. I don't know, vaporize me, slice me in half. I don't know. I'm just assuming space is very like sharp, I guess. No, thank you. She would not have to tell me twice to avoid that shit. I would be so like worried about the accidental stepping over that line that I would start to second guess myself on perfectly normal spells, probably. So we jump from this moment of her being like, so Alestin's going to, first of all, give you a lecture about crafting wards on fast moving objects, because those little stones you made could have blown your balls off. You're very lucky. So throw them down into that fucking gulf that I don't know how deep it is. And you're going to start training with me soon. And I hope you're ready, because I am going to fuck your entire life up. I know you thought you had it rough with Alestin. You didn't. He is a cream puff. You are about to be put through hell. And poor Hugh is just like, oh God. So then we jump to him talking with his friends. And he has, you know, shared with them everything that was going on with Bakori, and they're all just like, good God, really? And they hang out after he tells them everything in silence for a while, and he's just like, huh, this is really comfortable being in silence with all of them. Like, he feels like he belongs with them. And I love that being mentioned, because there is a real, like, I feel like this is something that you notice when it begins to happen with people that you're friends with. The moments where you can chill in silence and it isn't awkward and you're not worried about what to say. I think that's evidence that you're growing as a person in this relationship with this other person. And it's always kind of nice, you know, not feeling like you have to fill the space of silence with something, even if it's like not important. Let's see. If you told him a few short months ago he wouldn't just be a mage, but one apprenticed to a battle mage and bonded to a centuries-old sphinx, Hugh would have, well, maybe not laughed. He would have been too shy, but at least he would have thought you were crazy. And if you told him he'd actually have friends of his own, friends who were not only amazing mages in their own right, but who would actually stand up for and stand with Hugh, who thought Hugh was worth a damn, he definitely would have thought you were crazy. Hugh took another deep breath and slowly let it out. He could get used to this. And that is the end of the book. So I really, I felt like it was a little bit of an abrupt ending, I'll be honest. But I liked it. I like that we're opening a new door, and there's a real sense of like, there are new things on the horizon for him. Not that he is just going to leave behind his feelings of worthlessness either, but it being explicitly something that was being used against him is an interesting concept. And it was exacerbated, but you know, he was struggling with these kinds of feelings to begin with. So we know that they will probably still be around a bit and rear their heads every now and then. And I wanted to mention too, because I have been listening to the audiobook I mentioned, and I got like the first two books as a deal, and they're like in the same recording, which is kind of weird. So it just jumps immediately from that book, and then he says the Endless Urg and starts the next one. And I didn't, I stopped obviously, but looking at the text here, I'm seeing that there's an afterword. And I found this really fun, just like glossing over this really quickly. There is a little bit of information about the Reddit, the writer's Patreon, and he says he releases monthly Mage Errant stories, which is a really neat idea. He has links to the people who did the cover art and design. And then, in the meantime, if you're looking for more fiction in this vein, I highly recommend the following series, all of which influenced Mage Errant in one way or another. And he's got a whole list here, and they're all links that you can click to get to other series. And I just think that's like a really nice thing to do. I appreciate this author being like, I'm going to hit these folks up and not hit them up. I'm going to give them some credit. Diana Wynne Jones' Chronicles of Crestomancy series, which I covered for Spoil Me, some of those books, and they are delightful. Real weird sometimes, but a really good time. Andrew Rowe's Arcane Ascension series, which I have not read. Will White's Cradle series, obviously. Garth Nix's Old Kingdom series. I have read that also for Spoil Me, and that was outstanding and really fucking creepy sometimes. Tamara Pierce, Protector of the Small Quartet. I have heard of Tamara Pierce, but I have never heard the title of the quartet and have never read them. So, yeah. And I don't know, it looks like there's supposed to be another page, but for some reason this Kindle is not letting me click forward any further. So, but yeah, I just like that as an idea for an author to be like, here's a bunch of folks who influenced me. Because I feel like so many people are real weird about admitting things influenced them strongly. There are so many of us feel like we need to fucking invent things whole cloth out of nothing. And it's a wild way to be. Why are we like this? As if it's not completely original to our own brains, then it's of no value. Of course, everything's influenced by stuff that we have read. What else would happen, So I just appreciate somebody who's just like, yeah, here's where I got a bunch of ideas. So let's see. McShard says, earlier. Dan Nichols says the first book is basically a prologue. Quite looking forward to you getting into the next book. The series really starts opening up from there. Nice. And McShard says, I definitely agree. Book one feels like the stage being set for the series. I love a lot of the short stories on his Patreon and appreciate him boosting other authors. Yeah, that is something that would be interesting to me is to, eventually when I'm caught up, probably, it would be safe to join the Patreon and read some stuff. And folks here are saying that the Arcane Ascension, Dan says it's interesting, and MX Shard says that they love it. All right, noted. So yeah, that is the end of the book. I just really wasn't like, it went so quickly, you know? And I do think, though, I appreciate that as much as it can be difficult for me with, this is something that I talk about a lot regarding weirdly murder mysteries, but this is the same sort of concept, so I'm going to use this as an example. Especially in Agatha Christie mysteries, for some reason. She will have there be this whole subplot that is crucial to figuring out who did it, but that unless you correctly put together a lot of vague clues in context of the time and place, you would never even begin to guess that subplot exists. So, for example, there is a Poirot episode where there are people getting murdered, and eventually you find out that this one woman had been forced to get an abortion against her will, and that she is a Catholic, and that it tormented her because of guilt, and yada, yada, yada. This whole thing, that it was a massive influence on what happened. But we are not aware that she is Catholic. We certainly didn't know she had ever been pregnant. This whole thing is just completely outside of our purview. And so as a reader, it's not necessary that I figure the mystery out, but I would like to feel like I've got all the puzzle pieces to at least work with, and that things aren't coming totally out of left field. And I feel a bit salty sometimes when an author just drops something and I'm like, well, what the fuck? Where was that this whole time? And so there's like a kind of balancing act where, especially in a series where you're having magic and magical systems that the reader is not familiar with, and you're trying to establish a sort of like grounded rule set that things follow, but you also want to leave it open enough that you can do new stuff. You have to balance giving us enough information for things to make sense and feel like there are rules we can rely on, with there being surprises, things that we as readers aren't told, or sometimes the characters themselves aren't aware of. And this is something that Brandon Sanderson really leans on quite heavily in his stories, is he sets up a magical system with very specific rules, and then going forward, people begin to discover that the rules aren't what they thought, and that they've been taught according to outdated ideas or very limited experimentation, and that if you push it, you can find a new way to do something that nobody's ever done, simply because everyone has always functioned within these rigid rules and never really questioned that. So you have to figure out exactly how much you want to like pull the rug out every now and then. And so I am willing to go with everything with Bakori here, because I didn't have information about how demons work. And I think it works within the story about the fact that, like, Alestin was aware Bakori was influencing Hugh, and so he couldn't, like, explain anything very specifically about demons to Hugh, because then Bakori, I imagine, would have tried to manipulate Hugh away from trusting Alestin or believing him. Who knows? Basically, Alestin had to really be careful about letting Bakori know that he was onto him at all. And due to the fact that there's a really believable reason why he couldn't share any of that information, I am not only willing to buy that he sort of just had to let Hugh figure things out on his own, but I'm also willing to accept that there is more information that Hugh won't know, and also information, as it turns out, that Alestin, like, either doesn't know or isn't experienced with, such as the way that he's teaching this kid how to freeform spells when he can't even really do that the same way on the fly. So yeah, I think that was done well. I just think that he could have done a bit more with it. He could have played with it, and maybe he didn't want to foreshadow too much, but I don't think it would have been too much. You know, I had some suspicions about him setting Hugh up in the labyrinth itself, but in terms of anything going on once when he was in the school and not in the labyrinth, that never entered my mind that this demon could have that kind of power, and that's really scary. So, yeah, I think I'm really interested to see where things go from here, because I am not sure if this author is going to try and stick to a school year sort of setup only, or if he started out that way just to begin us with something that feels kind of familiar, and he's going to step way outside of that. So we shall have to see, I guess. McShard says, I remember when my English teacher was running an after-school D&D club, did a session talking about running D&D campaigns and told us to plagiarize stuff. I mean, you gotta. Everything is from something. It's fine. There's nothing new. You can do interesting versions of things, and I fully, support just trying to upend tropes for the sake of it, because that can often in itself wind up being so much more interesting than you expect. But I don't feel like trying to constantly distance yourself from all work anyone else has ever done is smart or meaningful or honest. And I appreciate the way he's approaching this. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Appreciate you all a lot. Thank you, Dan, so much for commissioning this. And I'm very excited to be starting on the next book right away. And until next time, y'all, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.